The wind swept across the cliffs of the Columbia River Gorge like the sigh of an ancient soul. Dawn had not yet broken, only a pale gray band of light creeping along the horizon. Sophie Lawson sat silently on a cold rock, hands wrapped tightly around a cup of stale coffee, her eyes red from sleepless nights. 3 weeks, 21 days. That was how long it had been since her world exploded, since her brother's car plunged off this very cliff. They called it an accident. The police said he lost control on the slippery road. But Sophie knew better. She had once been an investigative journalist. She knew how to read traces, how to smell a lie. And that night, the stench of deceit was thicker than the smoke of burning metal. She'd found a folder in Tyler's gym bag, names, dates, shipping records. One of them was marked in red Eric Dalton, the man Tyler was supposed to meet before he died. Who is he? She had asked herself. A businessman? A killer? Or both? Cold wind shrieked past her ears, tangling her hair. Sophie closed her eyes. Maybe just one more step, and everything would end. No more pain, no more memories, no more pitying stares. She inhaled deeply. The damp scent of forest and stone burned in her chest. Then headlights flared in the distance. A black SUV pulled up a few dozen feet away. No ordinary person would drive to the cliffs at 4 a.m. The door opened. A man stepped out through the mist, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the calm confidence of someone who lived on the edge of danger. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, eyes steady on her, as if he already knew what she was about to do. His deep, gravelly voice finally broke the silence, as calm as wind over a still lake. "If you jump, he wins." Sophie startled, whipping around. "What did you say?" The man didn't answer right away. He walked closer, keeping just enough distance not to alarm her. The light from the SUV brushed across his face, glinting off a thin scar at his brow, a flaw that made his otherwise perfect features seem real. Dangerous. The one who killed Tyler. His voice was soft, but each word cut like a blade. He wins if you die. Sophie's heart clenched. You knew Tyler. He nodded slowly. Not just knew. I owed him a promise. She let out a dry, bitter laugh. A promise to someone who's dead. He met her gaze without flinching. To someone I couldn't save. A strong gust hit them, nearly knocking Sophie off the edge. He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. His hand was warm, firm, carrying the scent of sandalwood and gunpowder. In that brief moment, she saw his eyes stormy, not cold, full of sorrow, anger, and compassion. She pulled her hand back, breath trembling. "Who are you, Eric Dalton?" The name froze her. Tyler had mentioned it in a fragmented note. "If I disappear, find Eric Dalton. He knows." Dalton, the one tied to the West Coast trafficking ring. If you believe the papers, yes. If you believe the dead, I'm the only one left who can make them pay. Sophie studied him, half believing, half doubting. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like someone who had lost everything just like her. "Tyler sent me some files," Eric said, eyes fixed on the dark abyss. He knew what was coming, but he didn't back down. "You're lying. I wish I were." Silence settled. The wind howled like the cries of souls beneath the cliff. Sophie turned away, wiping her tears. "Why are you here?" Dalton. "To pity me?" "No, to stop a mistake from repeating." She gave a broken laugh. "You don't know a damn thing about my mistakes." He met her gaze so deep it made her flinch. "I know what it's like to want to disappear. I know the smell of a loved one's blood on your hands." Her heart quivered. Whoever this man was, criminal or savior, he was speaking his truth. He stepped back slightly, voice low. "If you still want to jump, I won't stop you. But at least know why Tyler died before you decide to follow him." Sophie froze. "You mean, you know I have what Tyler left behind. And if you're brave enough to live one more day, I'll show you." The wind quieted for a long, breathless moment. Cold seeped into her skin, but something else stirred within curiosity. And curiosity, for someone who has given up, is the most dangerous spark. It can change everything. She drew a shaky breath and stood up. "One day, then I'm gone. One day is enough to change everything. He turned and opened the car door. Sophie hesitated, staring into the dark interior between death and life. She chose the side with warmth. As the SUV rolled away, she looked back at the cliff where one more step earlier would have ended it all. Now, the first light of dawn spread over the river below, a faint streak of hope she could still cling to. In the rearview mirror, Eric Dalton watched her. He murmured softly, almost to the wind itself, "Tyler, you kept her safe." Sophie didn't hear him. She only felt a strange stirring in her chest, as if she were being led somewhere even more dangerous than death the truth. Sometimes, people don't need to be saved. They just need a reason to live one more day. And perhaps that's how fate begins to rewrite the stories of two broken souls. If you've ever stood on the edge of despair like Sophie, remember, one day can change everything. Follow the story of Sophie Lawson and Eric Dalton, where darkness, guilt, and love collide to create something miraculous called life. The first sound Sophie heard when she opened her eyes was the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the window pane. The air carried the rich scent of coffee mixed with warm, woody notes of sandalwood, comforting yet unfamiliar. It took her a few seconds to realize she was lying in a spacious, dimly lit room with charcoal gray walls and a ceiling so high it made her feel small. A thick blanket covered her. Her clothes had been changed clean, neat, and dry. Then, memory hit her like a wave the cliff. The wind, the headlights, that deep, gravelly voice. Eric Dalton. Sophie sat up, a bit dizzy. The door creaked open, and the man himself entered. No jacket this time, just a black rolled-sleeve shirt, revealing a wrist marked by a silver watch. His eyes met hers, no surprise, no urgency, only something difficult to name, as if he were used to seeing fear in the eyes of people under his roof. "You're awake." His voice was low and steady, commanding attention without effort. Sophie glanced around. "Where am I?" "My house, outside Seattle. I couldn't leave you alone in that state. Aren't you afraid I'll call the police if you were going to? You would have already." His calm reply silenced her. He was right. Eric set a cup of coffee on the nightstand. "Drink? You need caffeine more than fear." She hesitated, then took the cup. The warmth seeped into her palms, grounding her in reality, a reminder she was still alive. Part of her wanted to scream, to run. Another part, fragile and curious, wanted to hear more. "Tyler sent me some files before he died," Eric said, eyes distant. But he didn't get the chance to finish. She asked sharply. "Who are you talking about, Sergei Ivanov?" The name froze her blood. Tyler had scribbled it in his notebook. "If I disappear, find him, he's behind everything." Sophie set the cup down, her voice trembling. "Who are you in this story? Eric Dalton, an accomplice, a traitor, or part of the same network?" He met her gaze, his dark brown eyes heavy like storm clouds. "I was once part of his world, but I don't belong to it anymore. A reformed mafia boss sounds like something out of a movie. Reality is crueler than movies." "Sophie." It was the first time he said her name. The way he spoke it, soft yet deliberate, made it sound both a truth and a challenge. She didn't respond. She didn't believe him. Not fully, but she couldn't look away either. Eric moved toward the window. The faint light traced the lines of his figure, disciplined, hardened, yet hiding scars beneath the surface. His voice lowered. "Ivanov killed your brother to send me a message." Sophie gripped the blanket, her veins turning to ice. "Why?" He turned to her. "Because Tyler discovered Ivanov was using my shipping company as a front for human trafficking. I ended the contract. But Tyler dug deeper, recorded, photographed, sent me evidence. Ivanov found out. And did the rest." His words sliced open an old wound. Sophie didn't cry. She just felt her heart tighten with each beat. "So what do you want from me?" "The truth," Eric said simply. "You're a journalist. You know how to tell a story people believe. I have the data. You have the voice. We share the same enemy." Sophie let out a bitter laugh. "You want me to team up with one mafia to expose another?" He met her eyes squarely. "I want you to team up with a man trying to atone for his sins?" Silence stretched between them. Outside, the rain kept falling soft, almost like breathing. Sophie felt a strange calm settling inside her. Logic told her not to trust him, but her heart recognized the sincerity in his tone. "You can leave any time," Eric added. "My driver's ready outside." She didn't answer. The freedom he offered felt heavier than chains. For someone who'd lost everything, freedom could be a burden. Dalton's kitchen was wide and bright, filled with the scent of pine wood and freshly brewed coffee. When Sophie came down, a slender, silver-haired woman was preparing breakfast. "You must be Sophie," the woman said with a faint southern lilt. "I'm Rosa, the housekeeper." Sophie nodded, a little uneasy. "I didn't expect to be treated this kindly." Rosa smiled gently. "The master's not good with words, but he knows how to care in his own way." Sophie pressed her lips together. The master. The word carried something old, something powerful. Eric appeared at the end of the hallway, holding a thick folder. His gaze brushed over her briefly, yet enough to make the air grow still. He set the folder on the table. "This is a copy of the data Tyler sent me. You should see it." She eyed the papers, unease rising in her chest. "If this is all true, why keep it? Why not go to the police because some of them belong to him?" Eric replied, his tone calm but chilling. "Why do you think the disappearances at Seattle's docks were never fully investigated?" Sophie had no answer. She opened the file photos of warehouses, containers, lists of names, most of them women and children. Her fingers dug into the edge of the table as she fought back a sob. "You see," Eric said quietly, as if afraid his own words might break her. "Tyler was right. He wanted to tell the world, and he died for it. You want me to write about this? I want you to finish what Tyler started. But this time, no one dies for nothing." She looked up, eyes glistening. "Why me?" "Eric, you have a whole team, because they work for me, and you belong to no one." A simple truth. But it struck the softest part of her soul. No family, no ties, nothing left except anger and grief. Eric poured another cup of coffee and placed it in front of her. "Work with me, Sophie. Not for me, for Tyler." Sophie stayed silent for a long moment. Outside, the rain eased, and a faint ray of light spilled into the room. It caught on Eric's face, highlighting eyes that seemed to hold a whole storm within them. For the first time, she didn't see a stranger, but someone carrying the same kind of loss. "I'll help you," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "But only until Ivanov pays. After that, I'm gone." "Fair enough," he said with a nod. "I don't keep those who don't wish to stay." He turned to leave, then paused at the door, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for choosing to live one more day." The door closed softly behind him, leaving Sophie alone with the files. She flipped through the pages, her eyes blurring at Tyler's scrawled notes. A small slip of paper fell out in Tyler's handwriting. "If anyone finds this, trust Eric Dalton. He's not like them." Her chest tightened. In that strange house, surrounded by ghosts and rain, she could almost hear Tyler's voice, gentle, trusting. The air outside still smelled of damp earth, but inside Sophie something had shifted small, fragile, like a beam of light cutting through storm clouds, yet enough to tell her she would never be the same again. Upstairs, Eric stood silently on the balcony, a glass of untouched whiskey in hand. His eyes lingered on the woman, reading her brother's final words. For a fleeting moment, something soft passed through his gaze, something even he couldn't name. And on that rainy night, between two people who thought they had nothing left to lose, an invisible thread began to form, fragile, dangerous, yet strong enough to pull them both down a path with no return. On the second night inside Eric Dalton's mansion, the wind whispered through the steel-framed windows, reminding the house that the world outside was still moving while inside. Time seemed to slow, as if listening to the quiet breaths of two people who no longer believed in peace. Sophie sat at the desk, papers spread before her like a labyrinth of ink and secrets. Through the reflection of warm light on the glass, Tyler's handwriting glimmered faintly. "If I disappear, trust no one." A part of her wanted to burn it all. Another part, stronger, defiant, urged her to keep going. Footsteps echoed in the hall, slow, heavy, familiar. Eric Dalton appeared without knocking. He wore a thin sweater, hair slightly tousled, his eyes deep beneath the amber light impossible to read. "You're still awake." "There's too much I don't understand," Sophie replied without looking up. "The more I read, the more I realized Tyler went deeper than I ever imagined." "He always went too far," Eric said softly, stepping closer. "Just like his sister." Sophie looked up, surprised. "You don't know me." "I do," he said, his voice slow and husky, like whiskey poured into silence. "I've read your reports. Strong, sharp, and too certain that justice is real." She laughed faintly, not sure if it was irony or bitterness. Believing in justice isn't a crime. "Mr. Dalton?" "No," he answered, gaze steady. "But believing justice comes from the pure-hearted, that's the mistake." Only a breath separated them. Sophie could smell the faint sandalwood clinging to his shirt, the scent of a man too familiar with danger. She turned away in her chair. "You know, I used to think finding the truth would bring me peace. But the deeper I dig, the more I feel Tyler was lost in a maze with no way out." "He wasn't lost," Eric murmured. "He found a way out. Someone else blocked it." Her hands tightened on the table. "Have you ever thought that if you'd spoken sooner, Tyler might still be alive?" Eric said nothing. The silence was dense, like fog filling the room. He stepped closer, stopping just behind her. "I think about that every night. Sophie, maybe that's why I stopped believing in salvation." She turned to him. Their eyes met not as strangers, but as two wounds recognizing each other in the dark. Her voice trembled softly. "Maybe salvation isn't about forgiveness. Maybe it's choosing to live, even when you don't deserve to." Eric held her gaze for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement, as if he'd just found in her what he'd been missing all along. He left first, his scent lingering in the air. Sophie sat motionless, listening to the wind against the glass, unsure if what she felt was the birth of trust or the first step into an abyss. The next morning, fog veiled the garden. The lavender bushes glistened with rain, their fragrance drifting into the hall. Rosa was setting the table when Sophie walked in, wearing a gray sweater that hugged her frame, dark circles still beneath her eyes. "Up all night again?" Rosa asked, placing down a plate of toast. "I'm used to it. Sleep doesn't quiet the memories." Rosa paused, watching her for a moment. "You're not like the other women who've passed through this house." Sophie frowned slightly. "What do you mean, those who came and left?" "Were all swallowed by the master's past," Rosa said, her voice raspy like smoke. "He couldn't save them, just as he couldn't save himself." Sophie said nothing, staring out at the rain-soaked garden. Rosa's words planted a seed of doubt. What was Eric Dalton really hiding beneath that calm, controlled surface? By noon, Eric drove her to an abandoned warehouse near the Duwamish River. It was where Tyler had worked before he died. Inside smelled of rust and mildew. Torn papers still clung to the walls, faded schedules without dates. "I want you to see this," Eric said, pointing to a locked steel cabinet. He opened it with a small key too smoothly for a first-timer. Inside was a worn folder stamped with the logo of the shipping company Tyler had worked for. Under the dim light, Sophie noticed the handwriting in the corner, shipment 24. Confidential. She opened it. Inside were manifests signed under false names. Each line, each number represented a container. Each container a group of lives trafficked like cargo. "Oh my God," Sophie whispered. "So many people disappeared because of these numbers." Eric stood behind her, his eyes dark and cold. "That's only the tip of the iceberg. He ran routes from Alaska down to California, all through Seattle." Sophie turned to him, eyes glistening. "Then why are you still alive? Why didn't Ivanov kill you like he did Tyler?" "He tried," Eric said with a faint, bitter smile. "But I don't die that easily, for a heartbeat." She didn't see a criminal. She saw a survivor, scarred but unbroken, standing upright after 100 battles. They left in silence. Outside, the rain had started again. Sophie stood under the eaves, watching the droplets fall through the pale light. Eric opened an umbrella above her. "Do you believe me now?" he asked quietly. She looked up at him, raindrops beating in his hair, his eyes carrying that soft, ashen sadness. I don't know if I believe you, or just believe in Tyler. That's fine, he said. As long as you still believe in a reason to go on. Her lips pressed together. His words echoed inside her like a second heartbeat, steady, persistent, and fragile as the strip of light cutting through Seattle's gray sky. That night, she didn't sleep. Outside, a storm lashed against the windows, thunder rolling like the city's distant sigh. Sophie held an old photo of Tyler, his bright smile, eyes too pure for the world he'd tried to change. She set it down, opened her notebook, and began writing Ivanov, Alaska Route, Duwamish Port, Eric Dalton, man once part of that world. Then paused and added one final line, the only one left alive to tell the story. A soft knock came at the door. Come in, she said quietly. Eric entered, holding a bottle of wine. I figured you couldn't sleep either. She gave a faint, tired laugh. I'm afraid if I do, I'll dream of Tyler falling again. He was silent for a moment, then sat down beside her, pouring 2 glasses. I dream too, he said. About Lucia, my sister. They took her in 2017. I wasn't there in time. Sophie froze. It was the first time he'd mentioned his own past. Lucia. Ivanov killed her. He nodded, eyes far away. I've done everything to avenge her, but vengeance doesn't help me sleep. Maybe Tyler knew that too. That's why he chose to speak instead of shoot. She looked at him, his strong, weary face dimly lit by the desk lamp. Something stirred in her chest, part pity, part fear, part longing. Do you ever feel like you're alive, but not really living? She asked softly. Every day, he replied, voice barely above a whisper. Until the night I found you on that cliff. The world seemed to pause. Outside, thunder rolled again. Inside, only wine, eyes, and silence heavy enough to tremble. Sophie set down her glass, her voice almost a whisper. If you're trying to make me believe you, you already have. Eric leaned slightly toward her, light brushing across his face. I don't need you to believe me. I just need you to stay. The words were simple, but they struck the deepest part of her, the part that had died with Tyler. Between the wind and the rain, Sophie realized she had taken one small step toward him, not out of reason, but out of something softer, more fragile, the warmth she didn't know she still longed for. And when the last light in the mansion went out, Seattle kept on raining. But for 2 souls carved by loss, tonight was the first time they didn't feel alone in the dark. That morning in Seattle was unusually clear. The rain had stopped, and April's first sunlight filtered gently through the drenched maple leaves, glimmering on the small lake in front of Dalton's mansion. Sophie stood by the second-floor window, watching the drops slide down the glass. She felt like one of them, fragile, transparent, yet ready to fall into something deeper, darker, all because of a passing gust named Eric Dalton. In the courtyard below, Eric was speaking with Rosa. He wore a white shirt with sleeves rolled up, revealing strong wrists and a long scar running from his wrist to his elbow, a scar Sophie had never noticed before. The light caught it, making it look both rough and tragic. When he lifted his head, their eyes met through the glass. He didn't smile, only gave a faint nod, a silent greeting. But in that glance, something made her chest tighten, a gentleness suppressed for far too long, enough to shake every defense she'd built. That scar? What is it? Sophie asked later that afternoon as they sat together in the library. Golden light poured across the shelves, reflected in the amber whiskey in Eric's hand, the color of old time itself. He set the glass down and looked at her for a long moment. A reminder. Of what? That even the strongest people sometimes fail to save anyone. His voice was hoarse, steady. He looked down at his hand where the scar gleamed faintly against sun-browned skin. Lucia, my sister, was taken in New Orleans. I arrived 10 minutes too late. 10 minutes that decided the rest of my life. 10 minutes that made sleep impossible. Sophie said nothing. 10 minutes, such a small slice of time. Yet some moments are cruel enough to destroy entire lives. Eric went on, his voice low, each word carved by guilt. When I found the place, there was nothing left but an empty room and blood on the wall. I killed 8 men that night, but I never found her. You. Sophie's voice faltered. He smiled faintly, a smile without warmth. I don't regret killing them. I only regret being late. She stared at him. In those dark eyes was a sea made of guilt and loyalty, the gaze of someone who had crossed the line between man and monster. Lucia. Was she like me? She asked softly. He tilted his head slightly. No, but you remind me of how she saw the world. She believed that if you were brave enough, the truth could save people, and the truth killed her. Eric said nothing. Her words fell like a blade, yet instead of anger, he only nodded. Yes, maybe that's why I kept you here. I don't want to watch it happen again. Sophie's fingers clenched the table edge. You're keeping me because I make you feel guilty, not because I matter. He looked at her, eyes flickering just for a second, but enough to make her heart stumble. I'm not sure I can tell the difference anymore. Sophie. That night, the wind picked up. She left the library and stepped out onto the balcony. Below, branches whipped violently in the storm, and the moon fractured across the trembling lake. The door opened behind her. There might be a storm tonight, Eric said quietly. You shouldn't stay out long. I like the wind. It makes me feel alive. He stood beside her, draping a light coat over her shoulders. Sometimes being alive is just another word for enduring. And you? She asked, eyes on the lake. Are you alive, or just enduring? He didn't answer right away. A strong gust blew through, tangling her hair. Eric reached out, gently brushing a strand from her face. His fingers grazed her skin warm, rough, achingly real. She stopped breathing. Maybe I'm learning to endure, someone like you. She looked up at him. Moonlight traced his face, every hard line, every weary edge. What are you afraid of? Eric Dalton. Losing another person. His voice was so soft she might have missed it if she hadn't been standing close. Her eyes dropped to his hand, to the scar glinting under the moonlight. Without thinking, she reached out and touched it gently. He flinched slightly but didn't pull away. The wound's healed, she whispered. No, Sophie. He gave a thin smile. Only the skin's closed. The rest is still torn. She gripped his hand tighter, as if to prove he was still alive, warm, human, bleeding. Maybe you don't have to close it. Some wounds exist to remind us that we once loved deeply enough to get hurt. Eric looked at her, and in that instant, his eyes no longer belonged to a man burdened by sin, but to one who had found a flicker of peace in the storm. He bent his head, breath brushing her skin, and pressed his lips lightly to the back of her hand, right where she'd touched the scar. It wasn't quite love. It was gratitude for daring to touch what the world had feared. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. She opened her laptop and played the last audio file Tyler had left. His voice trembled but stayed steady. If you're hearing this, you might be angry. But remember, Sophie, sometimes bad people have good reasons for doing the right thing. Don't judge them by their sins, but by how they face them. She froze on that last line, her heart twisting tight. Had Tyler known Eric all along, or had he trusted him enough to hand over his faith to someone who lived in darkness? Sophie closed the laptop and looked out the window. The rain had stopped, the moon had returned, pale and broken. She saw Eric standing on the porch, cigarette glowing red, smoke curling into the night, without knowing why. She went downstairs, maybe to speak, maybe to stay silent, only to be near him. He didn't turn when she approached. Couldn't sleep, he asked softly, as though afraid to break the quiet. No, I was listening to Tyler's voice. He trusted you. Eric stayed silent, eyes fixed on the distance. I wish I could tell him I tried. He knows, she whispered. And maybe, if he were still alive, he'd tell me not to leave you in this world alone. He turned to her then, his gaze gentle yet shadowed by fear. Don't say that, Sophie. I don't want you pulled any deeper into me. It's too late, she said, a faint smile curving her lips. I've been tied to you since the day you pulled me off that cliff. The silence that followed stretched like a lifetime. The wind stirred, flaring the last ember of his cigarette. Eric looked at her, then crushed it against the railing. His voice rough. I don't know if I can keep you safe. I don't need safety, she said.
I need the truth. And if you're the road to it, I'll walk it even if it hurts." He studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Then starting tomorrow, we're no longer survivors. Sophie, we're hunters of the ones who took everything from us."
She nodded back, no more fear, no more hesitation. In her eyes shone the same light he once saw in Lucia's, fragile, fierce, and worth protecting, even at the cost of everything. That night, when Eric finally walked away, Sophie looked down at her own hand, the one he'd kissed. It was still warm. She closed her fingers, feeling her heartbeat sync with the soft rhythm of rain outside. And she understood some scars aren't meant to be forgotten. They exist so that two lost souls can recognize each other and learn that sometimes salvation doesn't descend from heaven, it rises from the darkness itself. When one wounded hand dares to hold another, even knowing it has once drawn blood. At night, Portland felt like a city holding its breath. Rain drenched the streets. Neon lights flickered on the wet asphalt like distorted memories. Eric drove silently across the Hawthorne Bridge, the black SUV gliding through the storm like a ghost. Sophie sat beside him, her hands gripping a folder tightly against her chest. Neither spoke. Only the rhythmic swish of the wipers filled the silence, steady as a heartbeat. For 3 days, they had tracked one of Ivanov's main warehouses, a hub for human trafficking disguised as industrial materials. Sophie had never imagined her life would lead to this sitting beside a man hunted by both the police and the underworld, and feeling, strangely, at peace. Scared, Eric asked, eyes fixed on the road. "Yes," she admitted, "but I'm more afraid of not knowing the truth." A faint smile crossed his lips, a rare one, light enough to make her heart tremble. "The truth isn't beautiful, Sophie. It usually comes with blood and gunpowder. I've lived too long with lies. I'd rather it hurt me than blind me." Her words silenced him. In that moment, Eric realized she wasn't someone he had to protect. She was someone forcing him to confront the humanity he had long buried. Warehouse 24 sat on the outskirts of Portland, far from the city's glow. The wind carried the scent of salt and rust through the abandoned docks. Eric cut the engine and motioned for her to stay low. "You stay here. I'll go first." "No." Sophie caught his arm. "You need someone to document everything." Her gaze was so firm he didn't argue. He simply handed her a small pistol. "You know how to use this." "Tyler taught me," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd actually need to." "Don't shoot unless you have to," he warned. "But if you do, don't hesitate." They moved through the shadows like fugitives of their own pasts. Inside, dim light filtered through stacked containers. Every step echoed with the threat of discovery. Eric raised a hand. "Stop." He pulled out a small infrared camera. 3 figures glowed on the screen, one marked with a serpent tattoo, Ivanov's insignia. Sophie held her breath. He leaned toward her, whispering, "If anything happens, run to the car. Don't come back. "Understand, no," she whispered back. "If you fall, I won't let you die alone." Their eyes met in the dark. No promises, no vows, only a quiet connection stronger than either. The metal door creaked open. The smell of smoke, alcohol, and rust filled the air. A tall blonde man, clearly the leader, laughed in Russian. Eric understood enough. His face hardened. He signaled. 2 silenced shots cracked through the air. 2 guards dropped instantly. Gunfire erupted like thunder ripping through the night. "Run," he shouted, pulling Sophie behind a crate. Her heart pounded. Her breath mixed with the acrid scent of gunpowder and his nearness. "There are more than I expected," he hissed. "Reloading." A bullet struck the metal beside her, shrieking past her ear. She flinched but held her gun tight. "I'm not leaving you, Sophie. Don't talk." "Eric," she snapped, eyes blazing. "If this is how Tyler died, then I'll face it too." He looked at her furious and yet deeply, helplessly impressed. "Stay behind me." He moved like a predator, fast, precise, every shot deliberate. Sophie, hands trembling, fired at a man charging from the side. Her first bullet hit. The moment the man fell, horror and liberation clashed in her chest. Blood splattered across the concrete. She froze until Eric grabbed her shoulders. "Look at me, Sophie," he barked. "Don't look at him. Look at me." His voice anchored her. She gasped, shaking, but her eyes steadied clear, resolute. From afar came the blare of sirens. "They're calling reinforcements," she shouted. Eric gritted his teeth. "We need that hard drive now." He sprinted toward the control room. Sophie followed. On the desk, a computer screen glowed Shipment 41, Alaska route. Eric yanked the hard drive out, stuffing it into his jacket. Then footsteps thundered behind them. A man appeared, shotgun raised. Sophie reacted before she could think she fired. The man went down, clutching his shoulder. Eric turned, startled. "Nice shot. Just doing what you taught me," she said, voice hoarse. By the time they reached the pier, the storm had arrived for real. Rain and smoke blurred into one. A truck roared toward them, Ivanov's men. Eric shoved Sophie behind a brick wall. "Stay down!" He spun back, firing. A bullet struck his shoulder, blood blooming through his white shirt. "Eric," she screamed, running to him. He stayed on his feet, eyes burning. "I'm fine. Get in the car." She tried to pull him, but he pushed her away, firing again until the last man fell. They jumped into the SUV. Tires screeched through puddles as they sped away from the docks. Sophie pressed her hand against his shoulder. Blood soaked her fingers. "You're bleeding too much. I've had worse." He grunted. "We have to get out first. Eric, you're losing blood." He glanced at her, exhausted, yet his eyes still clear. "You're shaking?" "I'm not," she started, but her voice broke. "Good," he murmured. "Fear means you're still alive. People who stop fearing die fast." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't want you to die." "Eric," he gave a faint, cracked smile. "No one's ever said that to me before." They stopped at an abandoned house near the woods. The rain drummed on the roof. Sophie helped him inside, searching frantically for a first aid kit. "Take off your shirt. You should look away. Don't be ridiculous." She pulled the fabric aside. Blood seeped from the wound on his left shoulder. Her hands trembled as she disinfected and stitched the wound. Each pull of the thread was a gasp between them, pain, breath, and defiance intertwined. "I've stitched myself up before," he said with a weary half-smile, "but it never hurt this little." She didn't look up. "That's because I don't want to watch you die." "Good reason," he murmured. When she finished, she sat beside him, sweat beading her forehead. He looked at her softly. "You did well, Sophie." She turned, eyes wet. "So did you." In that crumbling house, surrounded by rain, blood, and silence. They sat close, no more gunfire. No enemies, just two people who had survived one more night.
Eric brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "You know, in all this chaos, I never thought I'd want to keep someone close. Until you." Sophie said nothing. She just looked at him, eyes heavy with all the words she couldn't say. Wind slipped through the cracks, making the candle flicker. The light wavered across their faces, two souls born of darkness, now learning, slowly, how to breathe again.
Outside, the rain kept falling endlessly. But for Sophie, tonight was different. Because she understood amid the gunfire and smoke, what makes people live isn't fear of death, it's having a reason worth living for. And that reason now lay beside her, breathing softly, warm, and heartbreakingly real. After the storm, Portland was wrapped in a fog so thick that even the streetlights looked like faint, ghostly blurs, memories veiled by mist. Eric stood by the window, a half-burned cigarette between his fingers, eyes fixed on the horizon where the gray sky melted into the earth. The pain in his shoulder still throbbed, but he didn't care. What kept him awake wasn't the wound. It was the sense that something unseen was shifting in the dark, an invisible hand ready to tear everything down. Sophie was still asleep on the couch, curled up under a thin blanket, her tousled hair covering half her face. For the first time in years, he felt peace just watching someone sleep. But peace never lasted long in Eric Dalton's world. The phone buzzed softly in his pocket. He answered. Vincent's voice, his right-hand man, came through, low and tense. "We've got a problem. Eric, talk." Someone from the inside leaked information to Ivanov. Both the Portland plan and the Alaska route are compromised. He knows we have the hard drive. Eric froze for a few seconds. "Who? I'm not certain, but the signal traces back to the Seattle mansion." His eyes darkened. "You mean Rosa?" Vincent didn't reply. His silence said enough. Eric crushed the cigarette, turning towards Sophie sleeping quietly. His chest tightened. If it were true, then the woman he saw as a mother, the one who'd comforted him through sleepless nights haunted by Lucia's ghost, was the one who had betrayed him. The next morning, Sophie woke to find him sitting by the table, eyes hollow from a sleepless night. "You didn't sleep." "No," he said, voice rough, distant. "We're going back to Seattle." "What happened?" "Someone betrayed me." She froze. "Who?" "Rosa." Her breath caught. "No, that's impossible. She cares about you, anyone can see that. I thought so too." He stood, his gaze as sharp as a blade. But kindness isn't always pure. Sometimes it's just paint over a deeper sin. She said nothing. There was a coldness in his eyes she hadn't seen before, darker than pain itself. That afternoon, they returned to the mansion. Rosa was in the kitchen, cooking, the smell of toasted bread filling the air so ordinary it felt unreal. When Eric entered, she looked up and smiled gently. "You're home. I was making your favorite." "I'm not hungry," he said flatly. Her smile faltered. She seemed to know what was coming. "Who told you?" Eric didn't look surprised. "The truth did. I just came to confirm it." Sophie stepped back, the air thick and tense. "What did you do?" "Rosa," she asked, her voice shaking. Rosa set the knife down, slowly wiping her hands with a white towel. "I didn't betray him. I was only trying to save him the way I couldn't before." "Save me?" "By handing me to Ivanov." Eric gave a bitter smile. "Just like you did with Lucia." The room fell silent. Rosa's shoulders trembled. "You know, I've known for a long time," he said quietly. "I just didn't want to believe it." Rosa turned away, tears falling on her wrinkled hands. "Back then, I followed their orders. I thought they only wanted to threaten her, not kill her. You don't understand. Eric, if I hadn't done it, they would have killed you too. And now you're doing it again." "No." She shook her head, voice cracking. "I just wanted Ivanov to stop. He promised not to hurt you if I helped him retrieve the data. I thought he might still keep his word." Eric's hands curled into fists. "He's never kept a promise." "Rosa, I know." Rosa smiled faintly through her tears. "But sometimes, a mother chooses hope even when she knows it's a lie." Sophie's chest tightened. This wasn't just an accusation. It was two broken souls unearthing their shared pain. "I raised you since you were 13. "Eric," Rosa whispered, "I know your habits, your fears. You pretend to be strong, but you're still that boy who never forgave himself." He went still. The words hit a part of him he'd buried for years. "I don't need forgiveness," he said quietly. "I need justice." Rosa gave a weary smile. "Justice, Eric, is just revenge written in prettier letters." The window shattered. A bullet tore through the air, embedding itself in the wall beside Sophie's head. Eric pulled her down. "Stay low!" Gunfire erupted outside, glass exploding into shards. "Ivanov's here," Eric shouted. Rosa grabbed a gun from a cabinet. "Go through the back. I'll hold them off." "Oh." "You're coming with us," Sophie cried. Rosa shook her head, eyes burning bright through the haze of smoke. "I made one mistake. Let me atone for it." Eric tried to speak, but she was already firing. The attackers fell back as she covered them. He grabbed Sophie's hand and ran through the back door into the downpour. A deafening blast shook the air. The kitchen burst into flames. Sophie turned just in time to see Rosa collapse near the table, swallowed by smoke and fire, her final act of redemption. "Rosa!" Sophie screamed, but Eric pulled her back. "No, Sophie, it's too late." He dragged her to the car. The fire and smoke reflected in their eyes, another piece of their past burning to ashes. They drove all night in silence. Only when they stopped by a narrow forest road did Sophie speak, her voice hoarse. "You'll never forgive her? Will you?" Eric looked out the window, the moonlight slanting through the trees. "She doesn't need my forgiveness. She only needed me to live. And she made sure I did." Sophie turned toward him, realizing that his voice no longer held anger, only the sorrow of a man who'd just lost family again. She reached out, resting her hand on his. "Eric, sometimes people betray because they're afraid of losing what they love." He met her eyes dark. reflective. And you? If you had to choose between love and betrayal, which would you pick? She hesitated, thinking hard. I'd choose silence. Because sometimes, words can kill too. He smiled faintly sad, beautiful, honest. You're unlike anyone I've ever met. Sophie Lawson. She replied softly, almost a whisper. And you're unlike anyone I've ever dared to trust. When dawn neared, they stopped by a lake. The water was still as glass. Eric stepped out, his left arm still bandaged. He pulled out the lighter Rosa had given him and tossed it into the water. The flame hit the surface, then vanished. Sophie stood behind him, watching his reflection ripple across the lake strong, lonely, heartbreakingly human. She came closer and took his hand. You don't have to carry every sin. He squeezed her hand gently. I don't know any other way to live. Then learn, she said, eyes fixed on the faint sunrise breaking through the clouds. Learn to live not through guilt, but through memory. He was silent. After a long pause, his voice came low and tired. Thank you, Sophie. For what? For not leaving even when I wasn't worth trusting anymore. She smiled through her tears. I never left. Eric, I've just been walking beside you on the same road, on a different side. They stood there, surrounded by fog and fragile light, their hands still entwined, no promises, only truth, a truth carved in blood and loss, yet the only thing left unbroken in a world collapsing around them. A week after the explosion in Seattle, they hid in a small cabin by Lake Tahoe, a place where the wind never stopped blowing and the sound of waves echoed like the heartbeat of a restless soul. Eric spoke less now, his eyes constantly shadowed with quiet vigilance. Sophie knew he was holding back a storm inside one of grief, anger, and the gnawing guilt that Rosa's death had left behind. She didn't ask. She simply stayed close cooking breakfast, reading files with him, moving quietly as if afraid even a sound might awaken the ghosts of their past. But the silence was fragile. In their world, peace was only a pause between two tempests. That afternoon, as the lake shimmered silver under the setting sun, Vincent appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, with a blade-like stare and a smirk that never quite reached his eyes. He was Eric's most trusted right-hand man. Yet Sophie had always felt something insincere beneath his charm. I've got news, Vincent said, his gaze slicing briefly toward Sophie. Ivanov's moved his base to Vancouver. But he didn't go alone. Who went with him? Eric asked, voice gravelly. Vincent tossed a folder onto the table. Alexei Morozov, the man you thought died in Bucharest. Eric froze. For a moment, Sophie saw the tendons in his hand tighten, veins rising against his skin. Morozov's alive. Apparently, and he wants what your girl's holding. Sophie blinked, startled. Your girl, she repeated softly, half teasing, half embarrassed. Vincent smirked. Did I say something wrong? Eric's tone went ice cold. Shut up, Vincent. The tension between them thickened, the air itself heavy. Sophie realized then they weren't just comrades. There was a history between these two men, long, complicated, and perhaps far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. That night, she couldn't sleep. She heard Eric's footsteps outside on the porch. The soft clink of glass whiskey and solitude were always companions to men like him. She slipped on a sweater and stepped out. You're awake again. I don't really have the habit of sleeping. Or maybe you're afraid of what you'll see if you close your eyes. He chuckled softly. A tired sound. You're starting to sound like me. She sat beside him on the wooden steps. The night was so dark they could only see each other by the dim glow of the oil lamp. You once said justice was what you were after, she murmured. But I think it's not justice you're chasing. It's redemption. You think I can be forgiven? He asked quietly. Eyes on the lake? No, she said honestly. But I think you deserve to keep living at least long enough to tell your story truthfully. He was silent for a long time. The wind blew. The lake rippled softly. Then he turned to her, his gaze clear the same look she'd seen the night she first met him on that cliff. Sophie, if I die in this war, what will you do? I'll write, she said without hesitation. About you, not as a criminal, but as a man who walked into darkness so others could see the light. His brown eyes softened. You make me sound like a hero. No, she smiled faintly. Just human. And sometimes, that's enough. In that fragile moment, his hand found hers, not forceful, not rushed, just a quiet touch, warm enough to make her forget the sound of waves breaking around them. The next morning, Eric left early, saying he needed to meet a contact in town. Sophie stayed behind and opened the laptop to review the hard drive. She wanted to understand why Ivanov was so desperate to retrieve it, but as the screen flickered to life, her breath caught. A hidden folder had appeared, one she hadn't seen before. The name read Lucia, MP4. She clicked it. The image that appeared froze her blood. Lucia, the young woman with ocean blue eyes, was tied to a chair. A man stood behind her, his face unseen. A cold male voice echoed through the speakers. If you ever betray me again, Dalton, this will be the fate of everything you love. The clip ended with Lucia lifting her tearful face and whispering, I forgive you, Eric. Sophie slammed the laptop shut, her heart pounding wildly. It all made sense now. Ivanov didn't just want the data. He wanted to force Eric to relive his worst moment again. Just then, a sound outside. She peeked through the window. Vincent stood by the car, phone pressed to his ear, speaking Russian. Morozov took the bait. Yeah, I've got the hard drive. Her stomach dropped. No more doubts. The real traitor wasn't Rosa. It was Vincent. She backed away, trembling, her mind spinning toward one thought, Eric. He was out there, alone, unaware that the man beside him had sold them out. She grabbed her gun and ran. She found him at an old gas station. Eric, she shouted, breathless. It's a trap. Vincent's betrayed you. He turned, confusion flashing in his eyes, and then a bullet screamed past, slamming into the steel post behind them. Vincent stepped out from behind a truck, gun raised, expression calm and cruel. I told you, Eric, you trust too easily. You've been working for Ivanov from the start. Eric's tone was low, eerily steady. Not exactly. I work for whoever pays more. And Rosa Eric's fists tightened. She died protecting me. Vincent shrugged. Her choice. Just like yours. Sophie's heart pounded. She saw the shift in Eric's face, no fury, no fear, just a chilling calm. The calm of a man who's already made peace with death. You forget something. Vincent, Eric said softly, stepping forward. I taught you how to shoot, and I also taught you never turn your back when the gun's still loaded. Vincent froze for a split second. 2 shots rang out. Sophie screamed. Smoke. Blood. Silence. Vincent fell first, eyes wide with disbelief. Eric staggered, clutching his shoulder, the old wound torn open again. Sophie ran to him, the smell of iron and gunpowder thick in the air. You're hurt, she cried. I'm fine. He gasped, forcing himself upright. Where's the drive? She held up the leather bag. Safe. But Ivanov knows we're alive. Then we move before he does, Eric said. Voice weakening but eyes still burning with fire. She grabbed his hand. You can't keep fighting like this. Eric? He gave a faint, tired smile. I'm not fighting for me. I'm fighting for Lucia. And for you. The words silenced her. Outside, rain began to fall as if the city was mourning the damned souls trapped in this war of blood and betrayal. They drove through the night. In the passenger seat, Eric finally drifted into exhausted sleep. Streetlights slid over his face, each scar, each hardened line, now softened by the peace of unconsciousness. Sophie reached over, gently touching his shoulder where the blood had dried. Inside her chest, something unfolded, not pity, but love. A love both tender and aching, born out of gunfire and lies. She whispered, I won't let you die in the dark. Eric. Outside, dawn broke cold, pale, fragile. But it was enough. Enough to show that 2 people were still alive, still driving together toward an unknown horizon. Morning at the Canadian border was swallowed by fog so thick that everything, the pine forest, the winding dirt road, even Sophie's thoughts seemed to blur into uncertainty. She drove in silence, occasionally glancing at Eric slumped in the passenger seat. His shoulder wound was freshly bandaged, but his face remained pale, as if each breath was a quiet battle he refused to lose. She had grown used to seeing him like this, fierce in danger, fragile in stillness. Part of her feared that vulnerability. Another part found comfort in it. It made him real, not a symbol of vengeance, but a man who could hurt, fear, and love. The road to Vancouver stretched longer than she expected. Near noon, they stopped at a small rest station by a lonely forest. Eric stirred awake, blinking against the light. "Where are we?" "Near the border," she said, pouring him some water. "A few more hours to Vancouver." He nodded faintly. "Ivanov won't let us get there easily." Sophie gazed out at the motionless trees. Only distant birds broke the silence. "I don't care," she said softly. "If it all ends there, at least we've seen it through." Eric smiled a tired smile that still managed to tighten her chest. "You know, sometimes I think I shouldn't have dragged you into this." "No," she cut him off, meeting his eyes. "You didn't drag me. I chose to walk beside you." The silence that followed was full of breath, of things left unsaid, of things that words could never hold. By late afternoon, Vancouver emerged from the fog silver gray, calm on the surface but simmering with danger beneath. Eric had an old contact there named Malik, a former Interpol agent now living quietly as the owner of a cafe in Gastown's old quarter. The door chimed as they entered. Malik, a middle-aged man of Middle Eastern descent with deep, watchful eyes, looked up and exhaled. "I thought you were dead." "Almost," Eric replied. "I need help." Malik's gaze drifted to Sophie. "And this is the only person I trust." Malik said nothing, just motioned for them to sit. He poured 2 cups of coffee, then leaned forward, voice low. "Ivanov's at the Westport docks. He's not hiding, he wants you to come." "Of course he does," Eric murmured. "He wants the hard drive." Malik turned to Sophie. "Do you know what's on it?" She nodded. "Records from an international trafficking network, right?" "Yes," Malik said grimly. "But that's not all. The drive also contains the names of the men behind Ivanov politicians, financiers, people in power. If you release it, not just him, but the entire system collapses." Sophie went silent. Eric met Malik's eyes. "I don't care what system burns. I just want Lucia to rest." Malik studied him quietly, then handed him a folded piece of paper. "Here, a hidden entrance to the Westport warehouse. But remember, Eric, once you go in, there's no way back." "I've never turned back," Eric said. Night fell. Rain began to fall again. Sophie and Eric sat in the car across from the docks, watching the golden lights shimmer through the mist. Stacked containers loomed like shadows, the air thick with tension and a strange kind of beauty, the kind that exists only right before chaos. "If I'm not out in 10 minutes, Eric said, loading his gun, "you leave. I'm not going anywhere." Sophie replied instantly. He turned to her, eyes dark but soft. "Sophie, this isn't a game. I can't let you die here. Then don't die before me." He froze for a moment, then laughed quietly. Genuinely. "You always know how to make me lose my composure." She looked at him, the reflection of the dock lights flickering in his eyes. "You've never had composure when it comes to feelings." He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward and pressed a brief, gentle kiss to her forehead, a kiss heavy with all the words he'd never dared to say. "Wait for me," he whispered. "If I don't come back, write about Lucia." "Not about me," she squeezed his hand. "I'll write about both." He nodded, opened the door, and disappeared into the rain. Sophie watched his shadow fade into the storm. Her heart pounded so hard it drowned out the rain. 10 minutes. He'd said 10 minutes. But when the 11th passed, she couldn't stay put any longer. Grabbing her gun, she followed. Inside, the warehouse pulsed with chaos, flashing lights, shouts, and gunfire. She hid behind a stack of crates, every beat of her heart louder than the gunshots. Ahead, Eric stood facing Ivanov, silver-haired, eyes like polished steel. "At last," Ivanov sneered. "You came to die." "Dalton, no," Eric said, voice calm, lethal. "I came to end this. End it." Ivanov laughed. "There's no end for men like you and me, only replacements." "Wrong." Eric raised his gun. "I don't want to replace. I want to erase. The shot rang out. At the same moment, one of Ivanov's guards spotted Sophie and raised his weapon. She spun, firing instinctively. Her bullet hit his leg. Eric, she shouted. He turned, eyes wide when he saw her. Sophie, what are you doing here? I told you I'm not leaving you. Ivanov seized the moment, lunging with a knife. Another gunshot exploded. He fell, blood spreading across the concrete. Eric froze, shaking, staring down at him. Ivanov laughed weakly, lips curling into a grotesque grin. You think killing me ends it, Lucia? Is still alive? Eric's face drained of color. You're lying. No, Ivanov wheezed, eyes dimming. She's with Morozov. The words hit like a blade. Eric went still. Sophie watched, terrified, his face pale, his eyes hollow. Lucia, alive, she whispered. He didn't answer, just knelt, gripping Ivanov's bloody hand. If that's true, everything I've done means nothing. Sophie knelt beside him, grabbing his arm. No, Eric, it means we still have a chance to save her. He looked up, and for the first time in years, his eyes burned not with vengeance, but with fragile hope. Then we'll find her, he said quietly, even if we have to walk through hell. By dawn, the rain had stopped. They stepped out of the warehouse behind them, smoke, ash, and the remnants of the night. Sophie turned back once, knowing that place would become a grave for their past and the beginning of something new. Eric took her hand, voice rough but steady. Are you ready? She nodded. I've been ready since the day I met you on that cliff. They walked toward the sunrise, a new beginning, carrying a promise unfulfilled, a person not yet found, and a love born beneath the thin veil of smoke that once hid their souls. The Arctic wind swept over the white mountain ranges, carrying a chill that cut through skin and bone. An armored vehicle roared down the desolate highway, its headlights slicing through the mist like blades. Eric sat at the wheel, his gaze fixed forward, his silence sharp as steel. Beside him, Sophie held the digital map, following the road that led to a name that felt more like a warning than a destination. Narsak base, the secret facility where Morozov was hiding. Since Ivanov's final words, Eric was no longer the same man. The fury was gone. In its place was something quieter, a stillness that frightened her more than his rage ever had the calm of someone who had accepted every possible ending. Sophie watched him, wanting to speak, but she didn't. She knew there are wounds that no words can touch. You can only walk beside them, hoping your presence keeps them from falling too far. When you find Lucia, she whispered, what will you do? He answered after a long silence. I'll take her away. Far from all of this, if she still recognizes me. And after that, he turned to her, a shadow of sorrow flickering in his eyes. I don't know. I never thought that far. Sophie bit her lip. A mix of tenderness and fear welled inside her, fear that once Lucia returned, she would lose him forever. They reached the base at midnight. The sky was the color of ashes, the ground blotched with snow and oil stains. Stacks of shipping containers loomed in the distance, red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Eric threw on a dark coat and handed Sophie a small pistol. Stay behind me. Don't wander. She nodded. Their shadows merged with the night, the sound of wind whispering through steel fences. When they reached the underground corridor, Eric noticed signs of life, fresh footprints, a still smoking cigarette, and the faint scent of perfume. He gestured for silence, then unlocked the heavy door. Inside was a cold, empty room, and in the middle of it, a metal chair. On that chair sat Lucia. She was thin, her long hair tangled, her face pale and hollow. But her eyes? Her eyes were alive. That single look shattered Eric's composure. He stepped closer, afraid that any sudden movement might make her vanish like a ghost. Lucia, it's me. Her head lifted. The light caught her eyes shimmering, fragile, as if made of glass. Eric, her voice trembled, cracked with disbelief. He rushed forward and pulled her into his arms. It's me. I'm late. But I'm here. Lucia cried softly, like rain on glass. She rested her head on his shoulder, the weight of years dissolving in a single breath. Sophie stood still, watching them. Something inside her clenched tight. That image, him holding Lucia, Whispering her name with a voice she had never heard before was too beautiful, too raw. And in that moment, Sophie knew she loved him more deeply than she had ever admitted, even to herself. The peace didn't last. The back door swung open. Footsteps echoed. Morozov appeared tall, sharp-featured, his ice-blue eyes glittering with contempt. "Dalton," he sneered, "you finally found your little sister." Eric stepped in front of Lucia. "Why, Morozov, because I needed you alive," he said with a cruel smile. "I wanted you to watch your world collapse, just like you destroyed mine." "I never meant to kill your wife," Eric said, voice heavy. "It was an accident. A crossfire." "Accident," Morozov spat. "She died in your hands. Dalton, and now you think you can redeem yourself by saving your sister. No, it's not that easy." He raised his gun, aiming straight at Lucia. "Choose, your sister or the woman you love." The air froze. Sophie's breath caught. Eric didn't move. His expression was unreadable, a quiet despair carved in stone. Then, calmly, he said, "I don't choose." And he fired. The bullet shattered the overhead light, plunging the room into darkness. Gunfire erupted, deafening. Lucia screamed. Sophie ducked behind a steel crate and returned fire. "Eric," she shouted. He lunged at Morozov. The gun clattered to the floor as they fought hand to hand. In the strobing light, Sophie caught flashes of blood, then silence. When the emergency lights flickered back on, Morozov lay on the ground, blood spreading beneath him. Eric stood above him, a knife in his hand, his face pale, distant, broken. Lucia ran to him, sobbing, clutching his arm. Sophie stayed where she was, watching through the haze of smoke, relief and sorrow twisting together in her chest. They left the base before sunrise. The northern sky blushed faintly pink as dawn crept over the snow. Lucia slept in the back seat, too exhausted to speak. Eric drove, eyes fixed ahead. Sophie sat quietly, listening to the rhythm of their breathing, her heart echoing the sound of the tires against the frozen road. After a long while, he said softly, "Thank you, Sophie." "For what?" "For keeping me alive long enough to see her breathe again." She looked away, hiding her eyes. "She's beautiful." "Yeah," he murmured, "like our mother." "And you," she said. "You look like a man who doesn't know where to go next." He glanced at her, his gaze deep and warm. "Maybe I don't. I spent so long fighting to find her. I never thought about what comes after." "Then let me help you find it," she said softly. He chuckled a rare, quiet laugh, warm against the cold. "Sophie, I've never known what to do with someone like you." "Start," she said, "by not leaving me behind." He was about to reply, but Lucia stirred awake. "Eric, where are we going?" He turned, his voice gentler than he'd ever known it could be. "Somewhere safe. Where there are no guns. No blood." Lucia looked at Sophie and smiled weakly. "Thank you for bringing my brother back." Sophie took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's not over yet. Lucia, you and your brother still have a world to fix." Lucia smiled through her tears. Eric looked at the two women, one bound to him by blood, the other by something just as powerful, and for the first time, his heart felt light. As the car left the snowy plains, Sophie leaned her head against the window. The sky had turned blue, sunlight filtering weakly through thick clouds. Eric said nothing, but his hand found hers, a brief, wordless touch that said everything. She didn't know where the road ahead would lead freedom, or another abyss. But for the first time, Sophie wasn't afraid, because beside her sat a man who had once lived in darkness and still chose to keep what little light remained, just so she could see the way forward. A month later, winter melted slowly across the mountains of Canada. The snow had stopped falling, and the forest streams, freed from ice, murmured like the first notes of a new life. A small wooden cabin stood quietly among the pines, its thin trail of chimney smoke rising like a soft breath. Inside, 3 people once hunted by their past were learning how to begin again. Lucia had recovered. Every morning, she sat by the lake reading, her faint smile as gentle as dawn mist. Sophie helped Malik contact international journalists, preparing to release the hard drive data proof that Ivanov and Morozov were merely pawns in a vast global trafficking network. As for Eric, he spoke little, but life was slowly returning to his face. The wound on his shoulder had healed, and the old scar on his left hand remained not as a mark of guilt anymore, but as evidence that he had walked through darkness and survived. That afternoon, the sky was startlingly clear. Sophie sat on the porch, typing quietly. Words appeared on her screen. Some people step out of the darkness not to escape it, but to lead others out with them. She paused, lifting her head. Eric stood at the edge of the meadow, watching Lucia play with the little stray dog they'd taken in. Sunlight spilled across his shoulders, turning the air around him gold. She walked over to him. "You don't think you'll ever get used to peace, do you?" He smiled soft and genuine enough to make her chest tighten. "Peace always makes me suspicious, but this time, I want to believe." She looked at him, the light glinting in his deep brown eyes. "What will you do after the data is released?" "Disappear," he said quietly. "The world will need someone to blame. I know how this game works." "What about Lucia?" "What about me?" she whispered. He fell silent, then stepped closer, his gaze deep as if trying to etch her into memory. "You don't need anyone to keep moving. Sophie, you're stronger than you think." "No," she said, shaking her head, voice trembling. "I'm only strong because someone is standing beside me." For a moment, the wind stilled. The forest held its breath. Eric reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek. "I used to think that after everything, I no longer had the right to love anyone." She looked at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Love isn't a privilege, Eric. It's a chance one that fate gives us again, even when we think we don't deserve it." He smiled weakly, beautifully. Then he leaned in and kissed her. Not in haste, not in hunger, just a quiet, lingering kiss between two souls who had finally found each other after too long. Too far, too broken. The world around them faded. There was only the sound of hearts and wind, and the peace of a silence too full for words. That night, the fire crackled in the hearth. Lucia played a soft melody on the piano while Sophie rested her head on Eric's shoulder, her fingers laced with his. He spoke quietly. "I sent the data. By tomorrow, the whole world will know, and they'll come after you." "I know," he said, smiling faintly. "But this time, I'm not running." Sophie turned toward him, her eyes glowing in the firelight. "I'll be here. I'll wait for a day, or a lifetime." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "You don't have to wait. Just remember wherever I am, I'll still see the light you carry." She gripped his hand tighter, afraid that letting go would mean losing everything. 3 days later, the news spread across the world. Headlines, broadcasts, social media screamed about the Dalton logistics scandal, exposing the core of a massive human trafficking network. Governments launched investigations. The world was shaken. The name Eric Dalton appeared everywhere, both as a criminal and as the man who ignited justice. Sophie sat before the screen, reading every line, her heart filled with pride and fear in equal measure. She knew he was gone. He always kept his word. Lucia walked in and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He'll be all right." "I know," Sophie said softly, her gaze drifting toward the forest. "He's a man who doesn't belong anywhere. But I believe wherever there's light, he'll find his way." She opened her laptop and typed the final lines of her article, titled "The Man Who Walked Through Fire." He needs no monument, only to be remembered by the truth that he loved. He lost, and he still chose redemption. She saved the file, then looked out at the crimson sunset. The wind rustled the pine branches, and somewhere far away, she thought she heard the low hum of an engine, then silence. Night fell. The wooden door creaked open. Eric stepped inside, quiet as a breath. He didn't speak, just looked at her, eyes weary yet bright, carrying a light she'd thought she'd never see again. "You came back. I promised I wouldn't leave," he said hoarsely. She laughed through her tears. He pulled her close. "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but if there's still a place I can return to, it's you." She wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "And if there's a place for me to begin again, it's you." They stood together in the small cabin, outside. Snow began to fall again, but this time, it wasn't cold. The firelight flickered, painting their two shadows on the wall, one who had lived in darkness, and one who believed in light now fused into a gentle, endless glow. The next morning, Lucia stepped onto the porch and saw them sitting together. Eric was making coffee, Sophie laughing softly, her hair catching the morning sun. On the table lay a handwritten note. Life doesn't need a perfect ending, only two people willing to stay when everything else falls apart. Lucia smiled and quietly closed the door, leaving them to their first real morning of peace. Outside, the sun rose above the pines. Its light slipped through the chimney smoke, wrapping them in a golden warmth like a promise. They had walked through hell, carrying their scars, but they had chosen love, and that choice was enough. And there, at the very end of the story, no darkness was strong enough to swallow them ever again. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel and share your thoughts below. Every comment is a spark that helps future stories come alive and reach more hearts.